survivors, families, and communities have a right to be safe from violence, safe from hate. And that's exactly what Bill C-413, to amend the Criminal Code 319, to add to the Criminal Code, in addition to Holocaust denial, the willful promotion of hate against Indigenous people by condoning, downplaying, justifying the residential schools.
In my final report that I released earlier this week, I noted that despite the well-documented reality that thousands of Indigenous children died at Indian residential schools, and that many children are buried in unmarked and mass graves, some Canadians have mounted a concerted effort to attack the truths of survivors, Indigenous families, and communities. And they are inciting hate towards them by claiming that there are no missing and disappeared children and no unmarked or mass graves in this country. These attacks are an attack on the memory of the lost ones, are hateful, and a continuation of the genocidal process against Indigenous people. Denial of the truth about the harms of Indian residential schools has a profound impact on survivors, their families, and communities. To be heard and believed, and to have the truth be visible and acknowledged, is a fundamental right and a prerequisite to healing. Denialists deny facts, attack the credibility of victims, and portray victims as oppressive perpetrators while characterizing themselves as the victims. This re-victimizes those who have already suffered and incites hate against Indigenous peoples. The goal is to maintain settler impunity and to protect perpetrators and deny the genocide committed against Indigenous people. Obligation 37 of the 42 obligations identified in my final report is that the federal government must amend the criminal code, making it an offense to willfully promote hatred against Indigenous people by condoning, denying, downplaying, or justifying the Indian residential school system, or by misrepresenting facts relating to it. Implementing this obligation would be consistent with Canada's commitments under the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Canada has a responsibility to uphold Article 15 of the Declaration, an declaration that enshrines Indigenous peoples' right to dignity and diversity of their cultures, traditions, histories, and requires states to take effective measures to combat prejudice and eliminate discrimination, and to promote tolerance, understanding, and good relations between Indigenous people and all other segments of society. I'm here today to support Bill C-413 and urge the government to pass the bill to put a stop to the hatred against survivors, their families, and communities, and to protect and honor the memory of the victims and the survivors of Indian residential schools, and to send a message that Canada is committed to upholding human rights and rejects the spread of hatred in this country.
And we cannot reconcile in this country if there's still a denial of the truth. If the very folks, survivors that shared their stories, continue to be abused in this country, there will be no reconciliation. Now, the Prime Minister said his most important relationship when he was first elected in 2015 was that with Indigenous people. So I am calling on the Liberal government to support this bill if they are truly honest about being committed to reconciling in this country. It must first start with protecting survivors.
We've asked the Prime Minister if he supports the bill. He mentioned that it's a difficult balance when you're putting limits on what he said free speech. We've asked Varani what he would do. He hasn't given us a firm answer. I asked the Crown Indigenous Relations Minister again yesterday. No firm answer. What does it say that your bill was introduced about a month ago now and there's still no decision from the Liberals as to whether or not this is something that they would adopt?
Well, I'd encourage the Prime Minister to read the criminal code. Inciting hate against a group of people is not free speech. There is a difference between free speech and inciting hate. Residential school denialism is inciting hate, full stop. Survivors deserve protection. They have a right to be safe from violence, as all other people across Canada have a right to be safe from violence. If the Prime Minister, if the Minister of Crown Indigenous Relations and the Justice Minister are serious about reconciling in this country, survivors, families, and communities need protection. And I urge them and encourage them to read the bill and give quick support to the bill.